Chapter 16. Daddy Who? Although Carrie had been suspended from school, he was up ready to escort May and me the next morning. He carried my books since he didn't have to carry any of his own. It was a gray and overcast when we started out. The mist was so thick we couldn't see very far ahead of us. It was like walking through clouds. It will burn off by early afternoon, Carrie promised. Despite his being punished for attacking Adam Jackson in the cafeteria and Uncle Jacob and Aunt Sarah's disappointment with him, Carrie uncharacteristically animated. He was talking continuously, permitting only a few seconds of silence to linger between us. It was as if he thought that silence would make us think and the thought would make us sad. He was especially excited about his plans to build his own sailboat this summer. For now, he had to use his father's. "I've had enough practice building models, eh?" he said. He was thinking he might even get into the leisure boat building business someday. "I can't depend on lobster and fishing industry," he explained. "Someday I'm going to be responsible for more than just myself," he added. I held May's hand and listened, a small smile on my face. As I looked down and walked, Carrie continued to voice his plans. He wanted a home just outside the village, and he wanted a garden and, of course, his own dock. He would raise a family with at least 4 or 5 children, and he would take trips to Boston and maybe even New York. "Providence Town is a good place to raise a family," he assured me. "It really is. I mean, it takes a lot longer for the bad stuff to get up here, and when it does, it can't hide as well as it can in other places. Know what I mean?" I nodded, but before I could speak, he added, "I knew you would. You're so much smarter than the girls around here. I don't mean just book smart. You have common sense." "Thank you," I said. He smiled and sucked in his breath and looked at the fog. "It'll clear, but rain's coming later tonight. I can smell it." After we brought May to her school, he insisted on continuing with me. "Just to be sure you're okay," he explained. When we arrived at school, he glared back furiously at any students who gazed at me with gleeful smiles on their faces. They turned away immediately and hurried into the building as if to escape the cold temperatures. "You just tell me if anyone bothers you, Melanie. Don't let them torment you in any way, hear?" "I won't. I'll be here after school to check on you." "But I told you I was going to go see Grandma Olivia," I reminded him. His eyes grew small with worry and disappointment. "I know, but I'll just check anyway before you go," he insisted. He gave me my books. "What are you going to do?" "I'll work on the plans for my boat," he said. "My father won't let me help him with anything while I'm in trouble." As if I might contaminate him. He sounded critical of his father for the first time. People who've done wrong bring bad luck. "Well," he hesitated, looking at the front entrance of the school. "I'll be fine, Carrie. Stop your worrying." I squeezed his hand and rushed into the building. When I turned at the door, he was still standing there looking after me. Most of the students kept their distance in the hallway, all gazing at me with some interest. Teresa met me at my locker. "How'd it go for Carrie at home?" she asked. "Not well. My Uncle Jacob was very angry. Actually, he's just angry at me." "It wasn't his fault or yours. You tell him that." "Yes." "I like Carrie," she said. "At least he doesn't put on a phony face," she added, loud enough for some other girls to hear it. Janet, Lorraine, and Betty walked by quickly, just giving me a passing glance. This day I concentrated only on schoolwork, even though I sensed there was a good deal of whispering and note-passing going on behind me. There was just one critical moment in the cafeteria after I entered. Then the jabber lowered and all the eyes were on me for a few seconds. Teresa came up and began talking to me. Then the din in the cafeteria rose again, and everyone appeared to go back to his or her business. It left me feeling as if I'd swallowed a spoonful of nails. Teresa told me that Adam Jackson had tried to recoup his reputation by telling everyone Carrie's actions just proved him right. But he stayed away from me, not even glancing in my direction. Toward the end of the school day, I had the distinct sense that everyone had grown tired and bored with this scandal. Some of the students in my classes, who had often talked to me about the work, did so again. I felt more relaxed and at ease moving through the corridors. All of Carrie's teachers were glad to give me the assignments for him, and every one of them said he or she felt Carrie could do better if he only tried and cared. Mr. Medito winked at me and said he was sure Carrie would pass English's final if the tutor would stand by him. I'll see to it that he does, I told him. True to his word, Carrie was waiting after school, his hands in his pockets and his hair on his forehead, his face drowned in a scowl, right at the entrance of the school when the bell rang, ending the day. Everything's fine, I told him immediately. It's over, forgotten. Sure. It is. Here. I thrust the pages of the assignments in his hands. This is your schoolwork, Carrie Logan, and I expect that you'll do it even though you're not attending classes. He gazed at the paper, then looked at me and smiled. You'll make me an A student yet, eh? You'll do it yourself. We started away. At the end of the street. We paused because I was going to walk to Grandma Olivia's. It's not a short walk, he warned. If I hadn't gotten suspended, my father would have let me use the pickup and I could have taken you, but I know how far it is. I'll be all right. I want to do it. I have to do it, I said. He nodded and kicked a stone across the street. You sure you don't want me to come along? Carrie, you have to see May, I told him. She can make her way home alone if she must. I once said that and you nearly bit my head off. He smiled. I did, I remember. All right, go on, but don't get upset and... Mr. Worrywart, stop it, I ordered. All right. I started away. Her bark's worse than her bite, he shouted after me. So is mine, I shouted back. He watched me walk off, while he then went to fetch May. It was a long walk, and when I broke into the main highway, it was harder because the cars were whizzing by, some so close I felt the breeze lift my hair. Suddenly, an elderly man driving a rather beaten-up orange pickup truck stopped. You shouldn't be walking on this highway, he chastised. I have no other way to go, I said. Well, get in, I'll drop you off, come on. My wife would give me hell if she heard I let a young girl walk along here. I smiled and got in his truck. The seat was torn and there was a basket of what looked like seashells on the floor of the cab, along with all sorts of tools. Don't worry about any of that stuff. My granddaughter likes to make things with seashells, he explained. He had a gray stubble on his chin and the sides of his jaw. His thin gray hair ran untrimmed down the sides of his temple and the back of his head, but he had kind blue eyes and a gentle smile. He reminded me of Grandpa George. Papa George, I thought, how I missed him. So are you heading up with your sales like that, he asked. My grandparents' house, the Logans, I told him. His eyes widened. Olivia and Samuel Logan? Yes, I said. I heard their granddaughter was deaf. I'm a different granddaughter. Oh, didn't know. Of course, I don't keep company with your folks. I worked for your grandfather once a long time ago, built a tool shed for him. Paid me on time, too, he added. His truck rumbled along in half the speed of the cars that flew by us, but he didn't care. Everyone's in a real mad rush, he muttered, chasing the almighty dollar, but they missed the good stuff along the way. He smiled at me, and then he grew serious as though he thought just crossed his mind. You're Chester's little girl. Yes, sir. Whatever happened to him? No one seemed to know much about him after he left with your mother. He was killed in a coal mine accident, I said, my throat choking up immediately. Coal mine? Is that what he left here to do? I never could understand. He gazed at me a moment, and then he saw the sad look on my face. Sorry to bring it up. Didn't know, he muttered awkwardly. Then he turned into a concerned grandparent again. I'm surprised to see Samuel Logan lets his granddaughter walk along this crazy highway. I just decided to do it on my own, I said quickly. He nodded, but his eyes remained suspicious. That's it ahead, he said. I know, thank you. He stopped and I got out and thanked him again. Now you don't walk on the highway no more, here? Yes, sir, I said. I'm sorry about your father. I just knew him when he was younger, but he seemed to be a fine young man. Thank you. Bye, he said, and drove off. I sucked in my breath and started to my grandmother's, walking up the driveway. Before I reached the front door, a dark-skinned man about 35 or so came around the corner of the house pushing a wheelbarrow. You looking for Mrs. Logan? He asked. Yes. She's around back in the vegetable garden, he said. I thanked him and went to the rear of the house where Grandma Olivia was on her knees in a fenced-in garden. She was dressed in a pair of old jeans and she wore a flannel shirt with work gloves. She had a wide-brimmed hat with a few fake carnations sticking up at the rear of it. I was so shocked to see her looking so casual. I paused to watch her dig out the weeds. The contrast between the woman who reigned like a queen in the elegant house and this woman with her hands in the dirt, wearing an old tattered clothing, was so great I thought I was looking at a stranger. She sensed me behind her and turned. Hand me that iron claw there, she ordered, pointing to the pile of tools nearby. I hurried to do so. Careful where she stepped, she said. I don't want to lose any of those carrots. She took the tool from me and snatched the earth around a tomato plant. You walk all the way? She asked as she worked. No, Grandma. Some kind old man in a pickup truck stopped to give me a lift. You were hitchhiking? Not exactly. You always get in a truck with strangers? No. She paused and wiped her forehead. It's gonna rain tonight, she said with the same tone of voice Carrie had used when he made his weather prediction. We needed it. I had a better garden last year. It looks nice. She shook her head and stood up. Then she pointed to the small table. There was a mauve ceramic picture with some glasses on it. You want some lemonade? She asked. Yes, thank you. She poured me a glass and a glass for herself, and she sat and looked at me as I drank. All right, you've come to see me. Why? She demanded. My lemonade caught in my throat for a moment. I took a deep breath as I sat across from her. I want to know the truth about my parents, I said. I'm tired of not knowing the truth and knowing only lies. That's good. I can't conscientiate a liar, and goodness knows this family had more than its share of them. All right, she said, sitting back. What is it you want to know? Why do you hate my father? He was your son. He was my son until she stole him from me, Grandma Olivia said. But I don't understand that. You adopted my mother, right? You wanted her in your home. She looked away for a moment. That was something I couldn't help. I never wanted her in my home, but I had to have her. Why? I pursued. She turned back to me. Haley was my sister's illegitimate daughter, she said. My sister was a spoiled, silly girl from the start. My father spoiled her, and she grew up thinking anything she wanted she could have. She couldn't tolerate waiting or disappointment. Her solution was to turn to alcohol and drugs. I always did my best to protect her and shelter her myself, and maybe I was to blame as much as my father, but I made him a foolish promise on his deathbed. I promised to look after Belinda and see to her happiness. Her sister was my grandmother? My mind spun. I tried not to look overwhelmed for the fear that she might stop talking. What happened to your mother? I asked. My mother was a weak woman herself. She couldn't face unpleasantness and always pretended it wasn't there. The truth was, my father had 3 daughters, not 2. My mother died of breast cancer. She ignored the diagnosis, just as she ignored all bad news. Anyway, my sister became pregnant with your mother, and I made a stupid mistake by having her here during the birth. I made the second mistake by not giving the baby away. My husband, she said bitterly, thought that it would be a horrible thing to do, and he reminded me of my oath to my father on his deathbed. So, she said with a deep sigh, I took Haley into my house and raised her with my sons, something I'll regret to my dying day. Then Belinda is my grandmother. Yes, she said with a nod and twisted smile. That wretch living in a home is your grandmother. Go claim her, she said. She looked as if she were going to end our conversation, so I repeated my original question. But why do you hate your own son, my father? Because he married his cousin and had me, I ventured. She regarded me with a cold, hard stare. You think you're old enough for the truth? She challenged. Yes, I said, my heart pounding and my breath so thin I could barely utter a word. Your mother grew up here, had the best of everything. My husband spoiled her just the way my father had spoiled my sister. All Haley had to do was bat her eyelashes at Samuel, and he'd do her bidding. Buy her the dress and jewelry, permit her to go out, even though I had already said no, and on and on. I warned him about her, but he wouldn't listen. She was a little girl I had never given him. Just like all the men, he thought that he was supposed to spoil his little girl. They confused flooding them with gifts and kisses of thanks and hugs as love. She had boyfriends. Dozens of boys marched through this house, followed her everywhere, came at her beck and call, groveled for her kisses. Every time I forbade something or punished her for something, Samuel overruled me. And what was the final result? The hand that fed her was bitten. She paused. The telling of the story was exhausting her emotionally and physically. She sipped some lemonade and shook her head. What do you mean the hand that fed her was bitten? I asked after she rested. Just like her mother before her, she slept around. And what do you think? She got pregnant too. With you. Then she did the unforgivable thing. Grandma paused as if to get enough breath and strength. She blamed Samuel. She stood before me in this very house and claimed my husband, her stepfather, had slept with her and made her pregnant. Samuel was devastated, but I told him he deserved it for all he'd done those years. I shook my head. I don't understand, I said, the tears filling my eyes. She laughed a wicked short laugh. What's there to understand? She thought if she blamed Samuel, she could escape the blame herself. But my daddy, your father, my son, turned on his own father. Chester turned on me, she said. He took her side, believed her, actually believed his own father could have done such a thing. Can you imagine the heartbreak I endured? Sitting there in that house and hearing my son tell me that he believed that whore and not his own father? Can you? I told them both to get out, and as long as he took her side, to stay away. I told him I would have nothing more to do with a son who turned on his own parents that way. He knew Haley's background, but she beguiled him too. just as she beguiles everyone she touches. Jacob was heartbroken as well. He couldn't believe his brother would do such a thing. They had a terrible fist fight on the beach behind this house and never spoke again. I shook my head. None of this can be true. Why did my mother bring me back here? I cried through my tears. Grandma smiled and nodded. Why? She wanted to get rid of you, dear. And she knew about Sarah's loss. Sarah's always been a kind person. She was willing to take you in with Jacob. God bless him for his kindness too. Wants to do nothing but the will to make Sarah happy again. Haley took advantage of someone in this family once more. It's that simple. I kept quiet about it. She continued, after all, you are my sister's granddaughter, and remembering the promise I made to my father on his deathbed, I didn't oppose it as long as I didn't have to set eyes on your mother. I sat there shaking my head. It had to be more lies, lies built on lies. My daddy never treated me as anything but his daughter, I said. He loved me. I'm sure he did. If he had only remembered his love for his mother and father as well, she said. I stared at her, trying to make sense of it, slowly realizing what it meant if what she was saying was true. If my daddy thought that Grandpa Samuel was my father, then he knew he wasn't my daddy, I concluded. Precisely, Grandma Olivia said with some renewed energy, and yet he still ran off with her. He still took her side and turned his back on his own mother and father. But who is my father? Take your pick. It could be anyone, she said dryly. Maybe someday your mother will tell you. Only the truth leaves a bitter taste in her mouth, so she can't stomach it. I continued to shake my head. I don't believe my daddy wasn't my daddy, I insisted. Suit yourself, Grandma Olivia sipped the rest of her lemonade in her glass. You demanded I tell you the truth, and I have. You said you were old enough, and I believed you. If you want to continue living in a world of illusions and lies, go along with your mother. Be my guest. Only don't come around here accusing anyone of anything. What you should do, she said, standing, is get your mother to come back for you and bear up to her responsibilities. But I wouldn't get my hopes up. She gazed down at me. As long as you behave and do what you're told, pull your share, Jacob won't throw you out of this house. They tell me that you're a really good student, so if you deserve it, I'll see that you get an education. I'll do it for my father because of the promises I made. I don't want anything from you, I said bitterly. She laughed a laugh that reminded me of glass shattering. In time, I'm sure you'll change your mind about that. Just make sure that you don't do anything to change my mind about being generous, she warned, pointing at her small, crooked little finger at me. That includes making my son and his family unhappy. I'm going in now to wash up. If you want, I'll have Ralph, my handyman, take you home. I sat there, my shoulders shaking, the sobs rattling in my rib cage and throwing a terrific chill over me. I embraced myself. I don't have time to stand here and watch you become hysterical, she said. When you're finished, come in the house and I'll see that you get taken home. She started away. I looked out at the ocean. The heavier cloud cover was making its way toward the shore, and the wind had grown in intensely, lifting the white caps. For a few moments, the way the ocean waves slapped the rocks hypnotized me. Terns screamed. I tried to shrink into that small hiding place in my brain where I could feel safe and unafraid, but that place felt like a cage. I hate Cape Cod, I thought. I hate being here for another moment. I rose quickly and walked slowly towards the front of the house. When I looked back, I thought I saw a curtain part, in Grandma Olivia's gaze out. But the sun dipped behind one of those heavy oncoming clouds, and the shadows that fell over the house darkened in the window, and like black magic changed it into a mirror. When I reached the highway, I didn't turn toward the town. For a long time I just walked, feeling mesmerized. Cars and trucks whizzed by, but this time their closeness and the breeze in their wake, the loud horns that blared, none of them bothered me. My daddy wasn't really my daddy. He could be anyone. Is that what Grandma Olivia had said with spite? How could Mommy have left me drifting in such a hellish place? She really was selfish. I didn't want to believe the terrible things Grandma Olivia had said about her, but in my deepest soul I knew that it all made sense. If I honestly faced up to what and who Mommy was now, I would have no trouble believing who and what she was back then. But to make such a disgusting claim, to blame my grandfather for my existence, I almost sided with Grandma Olivia and Uncle Jacob. I don't know how long I walked or how far I actually had gone before I heard the continuous horn blaring and turned to see Carrie in his father's pickup truck. He pulled to the side of the road behind me and hopped out. "Where are you going? I've been crazy with worry. Everyone has, even Grandma Olivia." "She told me the truth, Carrie," I said. The sky had become completely overcast. The wind was even stronger, and the temperature felt as if it had dropped a dozen degrees. I had been shivering without realizing it. Carrie quickly peeled off his jacket and put it around my shoulders. "Come home," he said. I shook my head and backed away from him. "That's not my home, Carrie. Your father is my uncle. Your father is not my uncle, and your mother's not my aunt." "Where are you going?" he asked, a confused, half-silly grin on his face. "Just that. My daddy... What? He wasn't my daddy. Mommy was pregnant with me by someone else, and she accused..." I had to swallow first before I could continue. "She accused Grandpa Samuel. Daddy believed her, and that's why they stopped talking to him. Your father and my..." It suddenly occurred to me who he was. My stepfather had a fist fight on the beach and never spoke to each other again. "You didn't know that?" I saw from the expression on his face he knew something. "I knew they had a fight, but I never knew why," he admitted. "Why didn't you tell me that?" "I didn't want you to hate us and leave," he confessed. "Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm leaving this place." I turned and started away. He caught up and took me by the elbow. "Stop, you can't just walk down this highway." "And why not?" "I've got to go home," I said. "I've got to see Grandma Arlene and Papa George." "You're going to walk back to West Virginia?" "I'll hitchhike," I said. "I'll beg for rides. I'll do chores and get people to give me lifts or money for bus tickets. But I'll get home somehow. I'll get there," I said, my eyes seeing him but looking beyond and seeing the old trailer house, Grandma Arlene waving goodbye, and Papa George smiling at me from his bed, and Daddy's grave, the tombstone that I'd hugged with all my heart before I was forced to leave. "Somehow," I muttered. "Won't you come home and get your things first? Have a good meal?" "I don't want to eat, and I don't care about those things," I said. "Tell Aunt Sarah I'll send this dress back the first chance I get." I started walking away again. "Wait a minute, Melody, you can't do this." I kept walking. "Melody, I'm going, Carrie. Not you, not anyone can stop me," I said, full of defiance and anger. I walked and he was silent for a few moments. Then he caught up and walked alongside me. "Why are you doing this, Carrie? You can't stop me." "I know, I'm just thinking about it." I stopped and turned to him. "What do you mean?" He thought and nodded his head. "All right, He dug into his pocket and came up with a money clip stuffed with bills. I'll drive you to Boston and give you the money you need for your bus ticket. You will? Of course I will. I'm not going to let you walk down Route 6 and hitchhike. And I can see that you're determined. Wait here. I'll go back and get the truck. But your father will be furious, Carrie. It won't be the first time and it won't be the last, I imagine. He's already going to be mad for me taking his truck, I added, and shrugged. He added and shrugged. Don't worry about me. He ran back to the truck and drove up to me, and I got in and we started down the highway. It's a long trip back to Sowell, West Virginia, Melody. I know. It's the only real home I've ever known, where people love me. There are people who love you here, he said. He turned and smiled. May and me, for starters. I know. I'm sorry about May. You'll explain to her, please? Sure, but who will explain it to me? Carrie, it was horrible sitting there hearing the story that Grandma Olivia... I never felt more like an unwanted orphan, I explained. He accelerated. She shouldn't have done that. She should have made something up, something sensible, something that wouldn't have upset you this way. More lies? No, thank you. I've been brought up with lies. I've eaten them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's time for the truth. It's time to get back with people who don't know what lying is. Everyone lies, Melanie, to someone else or to himself, Carrie said. Raindrops splattered on the windshield. I thought about him having to drive back alone. I don't feel terrible about you doing this, Carrie. I feel terrible about you doing this. Don't. I would feel terrible about not doing it, he said. Tell me more about what Grandma Olivia said. I recounted our conversation and he listened attentively, his green eyes growing darker and smaller. It makes some sense now, the whispers, the words I picked up here and there. It's terrible. I feel as if my insides will be tied in knots forever. I feel betrayed, fooled, Carrie. The man who loved me and called me his princess wasn't really my daddy. Well, being a father doesn't have to be dependent on blood, does it? He was good to you, wasn't he? You never doubted that he loved you. You told me. I nodded, swallowing back my tears. Still, I said softly, it leaves me feeling incomplete. You've got your family name, your heritage. It's so important to you and your family. I see that even more than I saw it in West Virginia. I'm nobody. I'm Melanie Nobody, I said, laughing. He looked at me. I laughed harder. Meet Melody Nobody. My laughter started to hurt and then soon turned into tears. Sobs that shook my shoulders so hard that I thought I would come apart. He pulled the truck to the side and stopped, and then he slid over and embraced me. Don't do this to yourself, he said. I caught my breath and sucked in some air with deep gasps. Then I nodded. I'm all right. It's okay. I won't do it again, I promise. It's okay to do it as long as I can be next to you, he said. But I hate to think of you alone out there, crying your eyes out with no one to comfort you, Melanie. They'll be Grandma Arlene, I said. He stared at me a moment and then slid behind the wheel again. We drove on. Car headlights blinded us in the rain, but we drove on relentlessly, firmly. Carrie talked me into stopping to get something to eat. I did it for his sake more than my own, although the hot coffee helped warm up my stomach and gave me some needed energy. I lost track of time afterward and fell asleep with my head on his shoulder. When I opened my eyes again, he told me we were pulling into Boston and heading for the bus depot. I sat up and scrubbed the sleep from my cheeks with my dry palms. Carrie went into the bus station with me, and we spoke to the ticket teller, who explained where I wanted to go, and the best ticket was one to Richmond. There was a shuttle service to Sewell, but he couldn't guarantee the schedule after I arrived in Richmond. Once I get to Richmond, I'll be fine, I said. Carrie paid for the ticket, then insisted I take another $50. Somehow I'll pay you back, I promised. You don't have to, as long as you promise to call me from Sewell and then write letters. I'll promise you if you promise me that you'll pass all your tests and graduate. Big promise, but okay, he said. You've convinced me to work harder, he smiled. That's the bus to Richmond now, the ticket seller announced. Carrie gazed into my eyes, his eyes full of sadness and fear for me. I'll be all right once I get home, I said. Don't worry. He nodded. I wish that somehow you had come to think of Providencetown as your home. When you have no real family, home has to be where you find love, I said. You found it in Providencetown, he said, indicating himself. I know, I whispered. I leaned towards him and kissed him softly on the cheek. Oh, I said, your jacket. I started to take it off. No, please keep it. Thanks, I said. He followed me out to the bus and watched me get on. After I sat at the window, he held his hand. Goodbye, I mouthed through the glass. The bus driver started the engine. Carrie's face seemed to crumple, his lips trembling. There were tears on his cheeks, and his tears put tears in my heart. I put a hand against the glass, as if I could stop crying by doing so. He raised his hand and the bus started away. He walked alongside for a few feet, and then the bus turned and he was gone. I knew where he would go when he got home. He would go to the attic and he would curl up on his cot and he would think of Laura and me and wonder why all that was good and soft in his world and seemed to slip through his hands. I closed my eyes and thought about Grandma Arlene's smile and Papa George and Alice and the warm living room in my old trailer home. Like a beacon in the storm, the light from those memories held a tiny spark of hope.